Hi, this is your mortgage guy, Dave Steinberg. We're here with Samuel Zand. Shmuley is a New York-based real estate attorney who's working towards getting licensed in New Jersey. Thank you so much for joining us. Educate us a little bit about your business and what your role is in a real estate transaction.
Sure. First of all, Dave, it's a pleasure being here. Thank you for having me on. In a nutshell, we are tasked as the attorney of record, not of record, as the attorney in the process to hold your hand, to guide the buyer or the seller throughout the entire process from pre-contract negotiation, whether it's listing the property or using a real estate agent and consulting with a mortgage broker, all the way to contract and closing and everywhere in between. We need to guide you, the consumer, and make sure you know your risks, make sure you know the timelines, and make sure you know how many Benjamins you got to come up with at the end of the day.
And so your role really is to protect the consumer.
Absolutely. But it's not only to protect, because if you just protect, then the consumer won't even know half the time that he's being protected. It's also communication, being I like to say hyper communicating with my clients throughout the process so that they know what's happening.
So imagine I was buying a home in New York State. I was buying a house in Nassau County. Say, what would I have to know? Where would an attorney come in, and who are the players in that kind of a transaction?
Excellent question, Dave. So the question of when the attorney comes in. So on a strict legal sense, the attorney doesn't have to come in right away, because first the buyer needs to consult with a mortgage broker who can also act as their advisor to explain to them what they can afford, what they can't afford, what they should be looking at, what they shouldn't be looking at, as well as figuring out a real estate broker to help them. Not necessarily is it critical to have one, but it's advisable. And then after they get past that and they know what they could afford and they find a house that they would like, then they come to the attorney to help represent them in the contract negotiations. However, it's advisable, whoever you know in the process, if you know your trusted mortgage advisor, or you know your trusted real estate broker, or your attorney, whoever it is that you know, get in touch with them first, because they have a lot of resources and advice for you.
Now, I bet you have lots of stories. I know that, for example, we always run into issues with inspection reports. Where do you fit in handling an inspection report that may have some surprises?
So that's a great question, and that depends entirely where we are. So you mentioned New York. However, I have shifted a lot to Jersey for the past 9 months, and I want to explain the different nuance from Jersey to New York. In New York, we have much less involvement in that process. Why? The answer is because in New York, you have to go ahead and do your inspection prior to going to contract. So we're not really involved at that point, other than a quick phone call with the client. So what happens is I explain to my clients, you want to look at that report, you want to discuss any issues with the broker, because it's the broker who normally helps negotiate if there's any major items. By the way, on the side, I also advise my clients, don't get caught up with the small ticket items, because every report is going to have a lot of small ticket items. It's inevitable. But you want to look out for the big ticket items, the roof, the structure, different things. So therefore, in New York, my role is more limited. In New Jersey, by contrast, the inspection period is built into the contract and comes after we already enter the contract. Therefore, you have any issues, you talk to me about it. I get involved in negotiating with the other attorney on your behalf. There's a little bit of back and forth, and we figure out a repair credit or something like that.
One of the things that we always have in a purchase transaction is title insurance. And can you tell us about the role of the title company and how you fit into that?
Absolutely. So it's very interesting, because title is one of the only aspects of the transaction process that the buyer themselves has very little connection with. But as the attorney, what we do is we order a title search, which brings up any potential liens or encumbrances or mortgages that are against the property. We need to, as the attorney, we need to highlight it over to the seller side so that we make sure by the day you close, the buyer closes, it's clear from all such liens, mortgages, etc. Then we make sure that the buyer purchases title insurance, because it's that policy, the title insurance policy, that ensures that if somebody comes in a year from now, or a day from now, or 6 months from now, anytime, and says, oh, look, I really have a lien of $200,000 against your property, you go to the title insurance company, and the title insurance company fights that claim and pays that claim on your behalf.
And it would be tragic if I bought a house and somebody else owned it.
Yes, absolutely tragic.
Shmuley, I know you're blessed with a beautiful family. You tell us a little bit about your family. How long have you been married?
I've been married approximately 20 years, thank God.
Wow.
And yeah, thank God, have 7 kids, beautiful, beautiful, Leah and Hara, thank God. And we have a daughter who's 18 who actually just walked in the room here, and she is becoming a real estate broker. So that's
really
interesting. Agent, a real estate agent, correct, as we speak. And then I have all ages and down to a 3-year-old, thank God.
Tell us a little bit about what turns you on. What gets you excited? What are you passionate about?
Passionate. I'm really passionate about spending time with my family. One of my prior bosses taught me early on, excellent people, Steve Lowenthal, Moshe Kaufman, who you probably know. They always told me family comes first. And they said, if you have a school party for your kids where they're, presenting something or anything like that, you go there as long as you don't have anything too pressing or urgent in front of you, then family comes first. And I love my family and spending time with them and grilling meats.
I know that you represent both buyers and sellers in respective transactions. Tell us a little bit about what the differences are and where your role might change for if you're representing a buyer or a seller.
Okay, excellent question as always. So I don't know that the role per se, the broad role doesn't change in my view, because the broad role is always to protect and help navigate the client, whether it's purchase or sale, and to explain to them timeframes, explain to them money, explain to them process. However, when it comes to a buyer, the mortgage, the mortgage is the most important aspect of the purchase transaction, because step one is they need to consult with their mortgage broker, make sure that they can get approved for something. And then they have to get into the nitty-gritties of making sure that they provide all the documents on a timely and organized basis. And I'm sure people ask you all the time, how long is the process? And possibly, I'm not speaking for you, you would say, well, a lot of it depends on how quickly you're going to get me those documents. If you're organized and you could get it, as a client can get the mortgage broker the documents in a day, then that makes your life much easier. And at the end of the day, it's all about deadlines and making sure you get through that process. That's the buyer end, because once you get that mortgage approval, then we go on to clear to close and we can close your deal for you. On the flip side, for a seller, usually the most important thing is title, because a clean, easy situation is he just has a mortgage, maybe a secondary loan on the property, and all we need to do is get the mortgage statement, make sure to order the payoff. However, plenty of times there are either judgments, there's an estate process that happens, there's different liens, and that's my role as far as the seller's attorney, is to clear all those liens and then to babysit and try to put a little pressure on the other end to get things moving faster.
Tell us a little bit about your role.
Yeah, so I look at it like the attorney involved is the captain of the ship, and that ship travels waters and the seas, depending on the style of the transaction, can get very choppy. at times. And and especially when you get into commercial transactions, even more so. And then you have pressures and times of the essence. But as the captain of the ship, you have to stay completely focused, and you have to continue moving the transaction forward. So when people ask questions, or my employees, they'll ask questions, I'll be like, you can't ask, you have to answer those questions. As the captain, the buck stops with me. Not only that, I need to reach out to the mortgage broker. I need to communicate with the real estate broker and communicate with the other side. I got to tell you, so many issues are averted just by communicating. And sometimes you feel like you don't want to communicate with the other side because you're nervous, because it's not going in the right direction. 9 out of 10 times, they will appreciate it and you'll get it done. So like I said, you take the ship and from point A to point B, and my goal is that my client should be stepping onto a ship for like a luxury resort vacation. And they shouldn't have any issues. We smooth sail from beginning to end, and then they disembark at the closing table.
Tell us a little bit about your commercial work. Do you represent commercial clients at all?
Absolutely. More and more lately, and more all over the country. And the dynamics lately from COVID and whatnot has been a move outside of the tri-state area. Obviously, you'll always have those investors that are dead set on staying in the tri-state area, but more and more lately, they're going to Georgia, they're going to Tennessee, Texas, Florida, and as in the commercial space, I'm their trusted advisor. So 9 out of 10 times, even when I tell them that I'm not licensed in those particular locales, they're like, you know what? I want you to be on board. And then to the extent that it's necessary to grab a co-counsel local, then we can do that. And the commercial, it's different, but it's not different. It's much bigger scale, much grander scale. There's typically much more title issues that arise, and then you get into violations and things. But again, it's about title and it's about mortgage financing. Those are the big ticket items. And it's also about communication. When I first got into this business, I said, how can I compete? There's a million guys doing the same thing that I do. But at the end of the day, they're not providing communication with their clients. So I try to give my clients my business WhatsApp information, my personal WhatsApp information, and that's just the nature. You got to be accessible. And like I said before, in the commercial realm, just like in the residential, communication is key with the adversary also. So it's about making sure you got your deadlines calendared and making sure to negotiate any extensions that you may need ahead of time, and sailing that ship to the destination.
One of the things that I value in my dealing with you and my interactions with you is that you're a straight shooter. I know that when you say something, I can count on it. And I'm sure that that's true for both your clients and other people that you interact with, because it's just so powerful when you know that the person you're dealing with has the integrity that you manifest.
I appreciate that. And I'll tell you, it sometimes becomes challenging when your clients are not as forthcoming. And you're like, just tell me like it is, or let's just tell the other side like it is. And not everybody has the same, importance and qualities, but you have that, and I try to have that as well.
So a lot of what you do on residential stuff really is around the buy and the sell. But on commercial, my understanding is that commercial property owners are in the refinance market much more often, and the role of the attorney in those transactions is much more prominent. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Very accurate. And for that very reason is why I developed like a niche where I try to put out there that even if you have your attorney who you use 1,000 times and you love him for your transactions as far as purchasing and selling, when it comes to the refi, jump on board with Zand Law, because it's a different beast, and it's very much about organizational, pulling emails from left and right. And actually, I recently hired somebody designated specifically for my commercial refinances. And basically, every borrower wants the same thing. They want the least amount of fees, and they want to close yesterday, right? Everybody wants to close yesterday. So it's our job to move things forward. And basically, it starts with the commitment. We review it and give out the comments. And of course, actually, it really starts with the mortgage broker, because if you have a stellar mortgage broker, then you'll get a stellar deal, and that's where the fees come in, because I can't help negotiate that much of the business terms. And then once we get commitment, we order title, we make sure to clean up the title mess if there is any, and we move toward closing. So it's really about being organized and communicating between all the parties involved. And of course, one other aspect is the Sema Consolidation. Should I explain what that is?
Sure. So what is a Sema and where does that come from?
Right. So in New York, you get hit with the mortgage recording taxes on every mortgage that you record. The government gets money from you, whichever side of the transaction you're on. So in this case, it's the mortgage recording taxes when you get a mortgage. However, there's a tool called a Sema, which is a consolidation and extension modification agreement, which basically says 5 years ago or 3 years ago or 10 years ago, I paid $100,000 to the city of New York in mortgage recording taxes. So just because I'm adding to that mortgage now, don't slap me again for a full amount. So instead, it's a tool that borrowers use to save on mortgage recording taxes, because what it says is that you don't have to pay any new mortgage tax on the old mortgage amount, only on the additional new monies. But that adds to the process, that adds to the time frame, and it adds to the legal expense, you could say. But at the end of the day, it's a savings sometimes of hundreds of thousands of dollars that's well worth it.
Yeah, when I talk about it, I use the metaphor of a wonton, and you have the kernel.
I love Chinese.
You have the kernel of food. In this case, you have the kernel of the old mortgage. Whatever your old mortgage balance is, that's covered by the mortgage tax you've already paid. And now you wrap the new mortgage around it, and the wrapper, that new mortgage expense, is the only piece that requires you to pay the mortgage tax. But now you have the technical complexities, because you have to get the different players on board, and that's your role, right? You have to make sure that the old bank is willing to cooperate, the new bank accepts the collateral, and there's a lot of moving pieces there.
That absolutely is. But I want to ask you, how do you find SEMAs play a role in your end of residential loans?
Well, we find that on both residential and commercial loans, there are lenders out there that are easy to work with. I'm guessing it's same true of you. We have developed over 30 years relationships with dozens of lenders, with law firms. And so sometimes when you look to do a SEMA, if you have a good relationship with the attorney that represents the bank that holds the existing mortgage, you're already at the 50-yard line. Somebody who's not in the game will often find that they're behind because they don't know the players. They don't know they may not know the lingo. They have to start from scratch. But having an experienced guy like you involved means that more often than not, you know the lender and the lender's attorney. You know who to contact for collateral. You know the process, and that's huge.
And one more, how do you find, what ratio of your residential loans actually have participated with SEMAs? In other words, is SEMAs necessary? Are SEMAs used and necessary in the majority of your loans, or much fewer?
Oh, in my business, SEMAs are an important aspect of New York State loans. It is critical in New York City, but it all depends. And we didn't really discuss this before, but when you look at a loan in New York City or New York State, depending on the size of the loan and depending on the size of the existing loan. So imagine, if you will, that you have you're doing a refinance and the person has a $100,000 mortgage. you're probably not going to go through the SEMA exercise because of the costs involved. The term of art is seichel. You need to have the common sense. You need to have the sense in your fingertips as to what makes sense and what doesn't. Understand the recording charges, understand the cost of obtaining it, and then use good judgment, because you talked about the time frame. Often, if you're looking for a SEMA, that may change your time frame.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we have a buyer. We can do SEMAs on purchase, but if you have a buyer with a 30-day time frame to close, that may be impossible. On the other hand, if you have somebody who's buying a property that has $1 million mortgage, and that they may save them quite a bit of money, and if the time frame allows, we'll go for it.
Got it. Understood. And it's happened, actually. You talk about seichel. It's not always so easy. Sometimes the margins of savings versus cost, and then the time lag, all play into it. So we'll start off and say, my borrower, I'll paint the picture to the borrower, and he'll say, yes, let's do the SEMA. But when you're a few weeks later and it's like pulling teeth and you're just not getting traction, you start to look at differently. And the buyer says, you know what, I'm only saving X. It's not worth it. I'd rather close the deal. And we jump off the whole SEMA thing. Happens also sometimes.
Yeah. And there are times, sometimes the past mortgage history is complicated. And so if you have someone who bought a property a year ago and they have a $500,000 mortgage balance, and there's one loan and it's clean and easy, that's a different story than maybe someone who bought a property 25 years ago and has refinanced 7 times. And the string of paperwork that's entailed there just changes the whole complexity. And sometimes you'll say, yes, it's going to cost you more money, but the downside of getting to the closing table and not having everything hang together, that could be devastating. So every case is a case in its own.
Absolutely. Absolutely right.
So tell me a little bit about your business and about your team.
Absolutely. So we have offices in New York and New Jersey, and our primary focus is all things real estate transactions, commercial, residential, and we represent buyers and sellers of both commercial residential properties. And we represent borrowers in commercial refinances, and we represent landlords in their drafting and tenants in their negotiation of commercial leases. As far as my team goes, so I'm the sole attorney, and I have 4 members besides myself on the team, one designated solely for the commercial end of things, and the other one who's more focused on the residential. And then I have a couple designated with a few other aspects.